Welcome back to the NFL Team Preview Series here at FTN. We're getting ready for the NFL season. We're in May, almost June, and we're trying to get those nuggets for fantasy football that are going to help us win and help us draft appropriately. And the only person I go to when it comes to Chicago Bears information is Jacob Infante on X at Jacob Infante24. He's the lead NFL draft analyst and Bears blog at WC Gridiron. He's amazing. He's provided incredible content here for the Bears, and we're coming back to him again because the Bears, Jacob, are a big-time team this year with a lot of prospects, a lot of potential, and a lot of things that we're interested in. So let's get started. Caleb Williams is on board. How's he doing? How are things looking so far? And what do you think this offense is going to be with Caleb Williams? Is it going to be conservative early? Are they going to attack via the pass right away? You called it. You said he should be the pick. He was. How do you think things look so far for the Bears?
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough to tell exactly how Caleb Williams and like Rome Odunze are going to do just based off a rookie mini camp. But the flashes we've seen in clips are very encouraging. I'm not going to overanalyze that necessarily, but at the same time, I do feel like there's a lot of optimism around this offense, and I think that especially for rookie QBs historically in Chicago in the last 20, 30 years or so, they really haven't relied on the passing attack. No matter who the head coach was, no matter who the GM was, that's just been the philosophy. I think that changes a bit more this season just because of, one, Shane Waldron's offensive philosophy being a bit more pass heavy. And two, I mean, like you mentioned, the Bears have invested really heavily on the offensive side of the ball in weapons. You're looking at, in addition to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet. They did bring in DeAndre Swift in the run game, but I think he's also going to contribute as a pass catcher out of the backfield too. That's not even mentioning Gerald Everett, the tight end too, who's going to get a decent amount of playing time as well. So I think from where the Bears prioritized their spending, both in terms of actual cap space and a draft capital, I think that shows that it should probably be a bit more of a pass-heavy approach. I mean, obviously, you're not paying a running back, what is it, like the $8 million a year on average that DeAndre Swift would be getting if you're not going to use him in the ground game, and I certainly think they will. But the Bears have been pretty run-heavy over the last few years. I think part of that comes down to having a run-heavy quarterback. But while I do think the ground game is going to be of importance for Chicago, I think we're going to see a lot more emphasis on the passing attack than we've seen in not just the last offensive scheme, but just past offensive schemes before that even.
Well, you mentioned the backfield, so let's go to that before we get to the wide receivers in the passing game. Help us understand. The Bears they signed DeAndre Swift. I could see that meaning two things. Number one, I could see it meaning Roschon Johnson taking a back seat, even though fourth-round pick from last year, good in pass protection, etc. I could also see that meaning that Khalil Herbert is the one who's getting squeezed out since Roschon Johnson is younger, Swift obviously coming in to be the lead guy. So help us distinguish which way you think the Bears will go. Will all three even be on the roster by the time we get to September? Because this was an effective running game, versatile, Caleb Williams, new jumpstart offense. There's opportunities here, but I'm curious where the touch distribution, in your opinion, I know it's only May, is going to be this year.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be pretty heavy on DeAndre Swift. And I think that obviously you've seen Ryan Poles hasn't, at least in his first two off seasons, he passed on extending David Montgomery. He went for, opted for Deontay Foreman at a much cheaper price. And the year before that, it was pretty, they drafted Treston Ebner in the 6th round, but other than that, there hasn't been heavy running back spending. So in year 3, to go in the direction of DeAndre Swift, I think it shows that they're probably going to rely heavily on him. And that's not to say Khalil Herbert's not going to have a role. I think that with how, from an efficiency perspective, he's got some of the best numbers of any running back in the game. And I think some of that comes down to the scheme, but part of that also comes down to his speed, comes down to his contact balance, his power. So there's certainly a lot to like there with him. And I think that he's too good to not get snaps. He's too proven to not get snaps. Where I'm a little bit confused by is where Roschon Johnson fits into all this. And I'm a little bit disappointed just because, highly touted coming out of Texas. I was a big fan of his. Rookie year, honestly, wasn't what I expected of him. Khalil Herbert ran the ball well. Deontay Foreman ran the ball well. Roschon Johnson really didn't do much of anything. I mean, he had some touches, but he wasn't super efficient with them by any means. And this being behind an offensive line that, as much as they've struggled in pass protection at times, really has been pretty good in the run game. So I don't know exactly how much playing time he's going to get. I think most of it's going to come on special teams. Again, I think that with, looking at Swift and Herbert now, the Bears typically rotated heavily to running backs when Foreman was healthy, or when Deontay Foreman was the starting running back and the other two were hurt, it was Deontay Foreman and it was Darrington Evans. When everyone was healthy, Foreman, stepped a bit into the background as a third stringer, and it was Herbert and Roschon. So obviously it's a new offensive coordinator. It's a new play caller on offense. So I'm curious to see how that works out. But again, in Seattle, it's pretty heavy. It's a 2-back system coming down to Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. So I don't know how big of a value Roschon's going to have. And it sucks to say. I think from a dynasty perspective, bringing in Swift really hurt his value. And even if the Bears don't extend Khalil Herbert this offseason, or next offseason, I should say, which I don't think is super likely unless they want to cut Swift and then extend Herbert, make him their guy, but I don't think they will, truthfully. Then you'd have Roschon stepping into a second string running back role, but then you have 2 years of, all right, you still don't really know what this guy is. Then you're probably throwing another 4th round pick or another 5th round pick into the mix. So truthfully, from a Roschon perspective, I don't know, but I think it's going to be pretty heavy DeAndre Swift with a little bit of Khalil Herbert sprinkled in Chicago.
It's very helpful, as always, Jacob. That's why I have you on. Last question here. Let's look at the receivers. So DJ Moore to me is the alpha, had some monster games last year, even with up and down quarterback play. The question is Odunze versus Keenan Allen. Now, obviously, Odunze's have some health issues right now, but assuming both are healthy, I'm curious whether Keenan Allen becomes the true number 2 or if he's used basically as a third option. And the other variable I'd like you to talk about is Cole Kmet, because Cole Kmet was an excellent fantasy asset where he's being drafted last year. He's gone 60, 50, and 73 receptions over the last 2 seasons, 612 receiving yards 2 years ago, now 719. And he has gone back-to-back 7 and 6 touchdowns. They bring in Gerald Everett, who is super athletic, but that really hasn't matched his production. So I'm curious where you project right now in May, the pecking order. Obviously, DJ Moore's number 1, but where does Allen, Odunze, Kmet sort of fit in here for fantasy football drafters as they're getting ready?
Yeah, so for this year alone, I'd say Moore, Allen, Kmet, Odunze, and in that order. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Cole Kmet, because I do think that obviously you extended him. He's been productive. He's been solid for quite some time. One of the better starting tight ends, I'd argue top 10 in the league at this point. I think that's pretty fair to say. But you did bring in Keenan Allen and you did bring in Rome Odunze, and you're not using a top 10 pick on a wide receiver if you're not planning on involving him in the offense. And sure, that might be more of a long-term play because obviously Keenan Allen's not going to be there for 7-8 years, but you're hoping Odunze will be. So from a pure talent perspective, that makes all the sense in the world. I don't know if it's going to be super high volume with Odunze. I mean, maybe someone gets hurt and then eventually that'll propel his rise. So I drafted Odunze 3rd overall in a dynasty league, 1 QB. And I was torn between him, Bowers, Caleb Williams. I already had Anthony Richardson at QB. And I mean, I think very highly of Caleb, but in a 1 QB league, I don't know. So I went with Odunze because you have, I think we have 3 receivers and a flex. So you have a lot more opportunity to play him. I don't think I'm going to be starting him a ton. I think I'll just say that. 1, because I'm admittedly pretty decent at receiver, and I did draft Marvin Harrison Jr. 1st overall. But at that same time, I think it comes down to there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You can't feed them all a ton of targets. And I know Jackson Smith and Jigba had over 90 targets for the Seahawks last year as a rookie. I don't think Odunze reaches that just because, the Seahawks didn't have a tight end quite like Cole Kmet. So I'd say Kmet value maybe a little bit down, but I still think he's going to be pretty highly targeted in the red zone, going to be a pretty reliable security blanket for a rookie quarterback. And then Moore and Allen, maybe their numbers drop a tiny bit from last year, but I still expect them to be, quality starting receivers, both in the NFL in real life and in fantasy too.
This is great insight, Jacob. I don't know anyone who covers the team who can go like you just did, getting into dynasty, etc. And you really hit all my points here. Keenan Allen's wide receiver 30 on underdog ADP. Rome Odunze's wide receiver 36. So they think they're very close. You're saying you think they're separate a little bit. Yeah. And Cole Kmet is tight end 15. To me, that is the value. I agree with you. I like Gerald Everett. I don't think he affects Cole Kmet as much as people think. And I do think he can creep up a little closer. Odunze's at sort of pick ADP 64. Cole Kmet's at 135. I think that's too big a difference.
Yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of that at all. I think that, obviously I think Odunze has the higher ceiling just in going forward in general. But when you have DJ Moore, when you have Keenan Allen at receiver, and they're proven commodities on the outside, Keenan being in the slot, but still, lined up at the receiver position. I think Odunze is definitely going to get targets. I think he's going to contribute. He might eat into Kmet's red zone touches a little bit because he, in theory, gives the Bears a much better red zone target than what they've had at receiver over the last couple of years. But I think Kmet is what he is at this point. And even if he's not a, let's say top 10 tight end, I think tight end 15 is way too low for him. So I think the floor, assuming he stays healthy, I think the floor is like tight end 12.
Brilliant as always, folks. No one better when you talk about the Bears. Jacob Infante on X at Jacob Infante 24. Bears blog, WC Gridiron. Jacob, you were the man. I appreciate a few minutes as always. We can't wait here for the summer, for preseason, all that fun stuff to happen. And the Bears are a hot topic. They are a team that can make a big rise this year. They have a lot of players in the fantasy community. We are into them. Thank you so much for joining me.
Appreciate it, Mike.